Right, hello, and welcome to a Dauntless Development video. My name is Liam, and today we're going to be looking at starting out in C# using Visual Studio. Now, to get started, the first thing you want to do is install Visual Studio. Now, to do that, you just go online, type in Visual Studio, and it should be simple to follow through. It's just it's a Microsoft product, so it's relatively simple to install. I'm pretty sure you'll probably know how to install a program. But yeah, you'll want to select obviously C#, and if you plan on using Unity in the future, I would select that as well. Now there are other things you can use to program in C#. You can use code blocks. You can use Visual Studio Code, which is a bit of a kind of a trimmed down version of Visual Studio. You can use quite a few other things, but the simplest thing, if you're on Windows anyway, is to use Visual Studio. It's very common. It's free. Well, at least the community edition is. So yeah, I would recommend Visual Studio, and especially if you want to follow along with this. So, once you've installed it all, you should come to a page like this when you open it up. Now, you might not see this recent tab over here that I've got because I've worked with Visual Studio, and if you've just installed it from scratch, then you won't have this. But when you want to get started, you're going to hit File, then you're going to go over to New, and then you're going to hit Project. And this is going to start up with a new project. Now, when you hit that, you will see a window pop up. That'll look like this. Yep, so you'll see this window. And I'm not sure exactly how yours will look. You might have different things, but what you want to do is you want to go to the Installed tab on the side. You want to click Visual Studio, Visual C#, and then you want to click Get Started. Now, all these other options in Visual C#, they're all C#, but they're for specific use cases which we aren't working on at the moment. So out of these two, we're going to use Console app. Now, the difference between a console app and a desktop app is a console app uses the console, so it only interacts with the command line. Now, the command line is essentially a way of issuing commands to the computer that are... the way you interact with the computer is purely by keyboard. So you type instructions, you type the values of variables, you type everything one by one, and you can use key presses, but you don't use a mouse, you don't use buttons, you don't have any visual feedback other than text, other than if you use the text to draw an image, but it is all text is the point. And a desktop app is like graphics. So this window we're looking at is a graphics is a desktop app. It's a graphical user interface, whereas this console app uses a text-based interface. So we're going to select console app because we don't need to work on graphics and we're just working on code. So you can give it whatever name you want. I'm just going to call it Hello World because that is what it's probably going to become. Is just a Hello World program. So that's a typical program to start it off with. Location doesn't really matter. I'm leaving it in the default location. And yeah, so once you've selected console app, you give it a name. I'm going to hit OK. And then you come to what looks like this. So it sets up some basics for you. You've got all these usings, which I'll summarize them briefly in that it's called, these are all namespaces, and this right here, you see this namespace. It just means it's a collection of code that we can use, that we can access. Now, for now, we don't need to talk about that, but just to keep in mind, when you see this means that you're using a certain collection of code or systems. So we're using this system.txt, we're using this kind of thing. And this namespace we have here is just kind of the name of the program. So we've got this class program, and we'll cover classes at a later date. For now, we'll just have the one class, and right here we have the main function. Now, this one thing is important to cover straight away. Every program, in every programming language that I am aware of, has a main function of some sort. So this is where the program starts and ends. So this first curly brace, that's what these kind of brackets are called, or maybe that's not the technical name, I might be wrong, you could correct me, but every programmer I know calls these curly braces. So the program starts at the first curly brace and ends at the last one. So any code you want to run, you have to run inside here in some fashion. Now, you will do that through functions, etc., and using other classes, but for now, we won't use all that. For now, we'll just be writing a small amount of code inside the main function. So as you can see, it starts you off with this kind of setup. Now, these double forward slashes, what that does is it creates a comment. And what that means is everything on the line after that point isn't code. So it's just writing. So this won't be compiled. This won't go into the actual program. Like when you run the executable, once you've finished, this won't exist in the program. This is just for the developer. So anything you leave here is kind of useful for leaving like a message. If you think of it like post-it notes, that's kind of what they're used for. So this is just, they give you a little bit of a hint. They say this is going to print hello world to the console. And when you press Control F5 or go to the debug, start without debugging. So debug. So you go over to here and then you hit start without debugging. Then that'll run the program. So console.writeLine, this right here, this will write a line to the console. And it will write this line, which you see in speech marks, hello world. And then read key waits to read a key input from the user. So when we run this, so I'm going to hit Control Alt F5, sorry. And you'll see this hello world. Now yours will appear in a small window. I've got this blown up so it's easier to see. But you can see it says hello world, and then we can press a key, and then it just takes that and then immediately says press any key to continue, and when you hit that, it closes. So that is how you just set up the program to begin with. Now what you can do is you can change what's in here, so you don't have to just say hello world. You can put whatever text you want. So you could say like, hello, this is my text. Oops, text. And then you can run that, Control F5, and it'll say that, and then same thing will happen again. But what you can do is you can use something called a variable. Now, variables are, if you're aware of algebra, and you know, like you could have like a number, and you could have it represented by x, for example, and you could say x equals 5, and you can have y equals 6, or something like that. These are variables. So a variable is just like it's a placeholder kind of name for a value. So we could have a variable. All variables have a certain type. Now, I will cover a lot of the common variable types at another point. But what we'll do, this right here is a string, because it's a string of text. That's what it's referred to. It's any kind of collection of text is a string of text. I'm just going to make that not capital just for grammar. So what we can do is we can make a string, and we can say string, and I'm just going to call it line equals, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it here, and then semicolon. Now this is something very important with programming in C# and a lot of languages. Every line must finish with a semicolon. And that is just the way of telling the computer that I'm done with this line, move on to the next one. Like it's how it separates things out. Because it doesn't read like new lines, like all this stuff, as much as I've put all these new lines in to the computer, these things don't exist. It doesn't pay attention to it, it just ignores it. So what we need to do is we need to say, put a semicolon to say, I'm finished with this line. It's like a full stop in a sentence, but this is how we use it for a compiler for programming. So on the next line, we've got this console.write line. So instead of having this text here now, we can just say a line. So we can say a line here, and then when we hit Control F5, it still runs it just the same because it uses this variable. So you'll notice that when we, and I've just closed that out, it didn't write the word line. obviously. So if we had speech marks around this, and we did Control F5, it would write the word line. So the difference is variables. When we put a variable in here, it will take the value of the variable. It won't take the variable name itself, unless you put speech marks around it. But generally, that kind of defies the point of using the variable in the first place. But what this means is we can reuse this line again and again. So we could say, I'm just going to Control C, Control V, and we can have it write it multiple times. Now, obviously, this isn't particularly useful, but you can use this for obviously more important purposes in the future. So you can reuse variables to do different things. Now, the last thing we're going to cover in this session is I'm going to say what we can do is we can have this line change. So we can say line equals this is new text, and then put a semicolon at the end because that's important. It's basically just like a full stop in a sentence. And then we can copy this line, this right line, and we can put it down, or you can type it out again. So now what's going to happen here is it's going to say that it's going to create a string called line. It's going to say this string is this. So it's going to say, hello, this is my text. It's going to write that text. Then it's going to say, well, that line, the variable called line, which is a string, is now called, it now represents this string instead. And then when we write it, what we're going to see is a different string of text, even though it's the same variable name, because we've overridden what the variable was. Now, whenever you use a variable the second time around, you don't re-say which type it is. Once you've said what type it is, you only say that once. So that's called declaring a variable. When we reuse it again, we're just using the variable, but when we say the type, the first time we use it, we are declaring the variable. So that's quite interesting because now we can have a variable that we can change as we go. Now this can be used for, say, for example, I don't know, a counter, so you can count things up, and then you can keep saying like, you can print out like the number each time and change it. You can make, you can do different things. Variables are used for everything. But yeah, so this is kind of just a little setup, just the basics. And yeah, so what we can cover in the future, is, which I will cover in a future video, is taking the console input and changing variables based on what you type in. So yeah, that's all for today. Well, for now anyway. And I'll see you in another video.